So, let's get right into it. On September 16, 2025, Jimmy Kimmel, late-night host, told jokes about the news. But this time, one joke hit like a political earthquake. The subject, the recent tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk. That doesn't sound like a laughing matter. And you'd be right. The joke wasn't about the killing itself. It was about a hypothetical reaction from Donald Trump's supporters. Kimmel quipped, "If the former president were assassinated, his followers wouldn't just be sad. They'd probably try to vote for him anyway. Maybe even prop his body up, Weekend at Bernie's style." It was a 5-second dark, politically charged punchline. In today's America, 5 seconds can detonate a firestorm. That single joke set off a chain reaction. Before the show finished on the West Coast, clips were rocketing across social media, stripped of context. Conservative outlets and influencers framed it as Kimmel mocking Charlie Kirk, and conservatives broadly. The outrage was swift and organized. The narrative, liberal Hollywood elites laughing at the murder of a political opponent. That interpretation became dominant in right-wing circles. It tapped into long-running resentment toward a perceived biased, out-of-touch media establishment. Within hours, the story stopped being about a comedian's edgy joke and became a culture war battle. The fallout wasn't just online. Pressure on ABC and parent company Disney built almost instantly. Calls for boycotts, demands for Kimmel's firing. Accusations of hypocrisy flooded the internet. It was a perfect storm of political polarization, cancel culture from the right, and raw grief over a political assassination. For ABC and Disney, this wasn't a PR headache. It was a crisis. They were caught between defending a star host's freedom to make provocative comedy and placating a massive, politically mobilized audience. The joke became a symbol of a deep, unbridgeable chasm in American life. This episode is a masterclass in how modern political battles are fought. Policy elections, culture symbols, media. Let's break down how this all went down because the speed is part of the story. The joke aired on the night of Tuesday, September 16th. By Wednesday morning, September 17th, the outrage machine was in full swing. But this wasn't just angry tweets. High-profile figures in the Trump administration, most notably Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr, publicly condemned the remarks. Carr didn't just express his disapproval, he suggested that ABC's broadcast licenses could be at risk. This was a massive escalation. It was one thing for the public to be angry, it was another thing entirely for a powerful federal regulator to threaten the network's very ability to operate. Faced with this immense pressure from both the public and the government, Disney and ABC made a swift and decisive move. Later that same day, on September 17th, they announced that Jimmy Kimmel Live was suspended indefinitely. The official statement was vague, citing the need for a period of reflection, but the message was clear. The heat was too intense. The suspension was a dramatic step. Indefinite suspensions are rare in television, especially for a flagship show with a host as established as Kimmel. It signaled that the network was taking the threats, particularly the regulatory ones, very seriously. The suspension was scheduled to last from September 17th through September 22nd, effectively taking the show off the air for the rest of the week. During this 5-day suspension, the debate only intensified. Supporters of Kimmel free speech advocates cried foul, arguing that a comedian was being silenced by political pressure from the government. They saw it as a chilling example of an administration using its power to punish its media critics. On the other side, those who were offended by the joke. To understand why a joke could cause such a massive explosion, you have to understand the event that preceded it. On September 10th, 2025, just a week before Kimmel's monologue, the nation was shaken by a horrifying act of political violence. Charlie Kirk, the 32-year-old founder of Turning Point USA, a prominent conservative activist, was assassinated. He was speaking at an event at Utah Valley University, taking questions from the audience about mass shootings. In a chilling moment captured on video, a man in the audience shot Kirk, who was struck in the neck. He was rushed to a nearby hospital but was pronounced dead. It was a brutal public execution of a political figure. The shooter was quickly identified and apprehended. His name was Tyler Robinson, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. Authorities found a note he had left behind explicitly stating his intention. He had even texted his roommate about the note's location on the day of the shooting. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a premeditated murder. The political nature of the crime was underscored by evidence at the scene. Investigators discovered bullet casings engraved with anti-fascist messages. That pointed to an ideologically driven motive. The assassination sent a shockwave of grief and fear across the political spectrum, especially on the right. Charlie Kirk was young, charismatic, and highly influential in the conservative movement. To his followers, he was a fearless warrior for their values. His murder was seen as an attack on their entire movement. It confirmed fears that heated political rhetoric could spill into real-world violence. In the days after his death, grief mixed with anger and calls for accountability. This was the context into which Jimmy Kimmel's joke landed. It wasn't just a joke about a politician. It touched a fresh, raw wound. Charlie Kirk's assassination, as shocking as it was, did not happen in a vacuum. It was the grim crescendo in a year already defined by a terrifying rise in political violence across the United States. The year 2025 had seen a steady drumbeat of attacks, pushing the country closer and closer to the brink. According to researchers at the START Consortium, the first half of the year alone saw 150 politically motivated attacks, a number that was nearly double the total from the same period in 2024. This wasn't just a statistical anomaly, it was a trend that everyone could feel. A sense of simmering rage that was increasingly boiling over into bloodshed. The incidents were varied and widespread, touching every corner of the country and every level of government. In April, the home of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro was targeted in an arson attack. In May, staffers at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. were killed in a violent assault. In June, 2 state legislators in Minnesota were shot in a targeted attack. These were not protests that got out of hand. They were deliberate acts of violence aimed at political figures and institutions. It felt as though the guardrails of civil society were collapsing, and the once unthinkable was becoming a regular feature of the nightly news. The political discourse had become so toxic that violence was starting to feel, for some, like a legitimate tool. The Kirk assassination, however, felt different. It was a public execution of a major national political figure, broadcast for all to see. This brazenness sent a new kind of chill through the political establishment. Lawmakers and public figures from both parties began to openly question their own security. The traditional rituals of American democracy, town halls, outdoor rallies, campaign meet and greets, suddenly seemed fraught with danger. The delicate balance between being accessible to the public and ensuring personal safety was tilting heavily towards security. The murder forced a national reckoning about how to conduct politics. A key player in this drama was Brendan Carr, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Now, the FCC is typically known for dealing with things like spectrum allocation and net neutrality. Not exactly front-page news. But, under the Trump administration, the agency has taken on a much more aggressive and openly political role. Carr, who literally wrote the FCC chapter for the Conservative Playbook Project 2025, has made it his mission to go after what he calls the censorship cartel, which in his view includes media outlets and tech companies perceived as hostile to the MAGA movement. When Kimmel's joke went viral, Carr didn't just tweet his disapproval. He used his official position as the nation's top media regulator to issue a direct threat to ABC and its parent company, Disney. He publicly questioned whether ABC's broadcast affiliates should continue to have their licenses renewed by the FCC. This is the nuclear option for a regulator. A broadcast license is what allows a station to exist. Threatening to revoke it is like, threatening a restaurant with a bulldozer. Carr's argument was that by allowing content like Kimmel's joke, the network was failing to serve the public interest, a vague but powerful requirement under FCC rules. It was a clear and unambiguous shot across the bow. This wasn't a one-off threat either. It was part of a broader pattern of pressure from Carr and the administration. He had already announced his intention to go after other shows, specifically naming ABC's daytime talk show The View. He publicly questioned whether programs like The View or Jimmy Kimmel Live should continue to qualify for regulatory exemptions as bona fide news programs. By challenging this designation, he was opening the door for the FCC to apply much stricter rules, like the equal time rule, which could make these shows impossible to produce. He was, in essence, trying to use the regulatory power of the state to reshape the media landscape to be more favorable to the administration. This strategy represents a fundamental shift in the role of the FCC. For a massive publicly traded company like Disney, the Kimmel situation was a nightmare scenario. They were caught between two powerful opposing forces. On one side, free speech, creative expression. Jimmy Kimmel is one of their biggest stars. His show pushes boundaries. It's built on sharp political satire. Muzzling him would alienate the creative community. It would damage the show's brand. It would set a precedent that outrage campaigns could dictate programming. It would look like a cowardly capitulation to political bullies. That would undermine credibility with much of their audience, and with their own employees. On the other side, an overwhelming mountain of pressure. First, regulatory threat from the FCC. The risk of losing broadcast licenses is an existential threat. No media company can ignore that. Second, commercial pressure. An organized boycott could damage their brand. It was fueled by a narrative of disrespect toward a murder victim. And it could hurt their bottom line. Advertisers get skittish in controversies. Disney's family-friendly brand is particularly vulnerable. Vulnerable to accusations of promoting incivility and hate. They had to weigh abstract free speech against concrete business risks. Then, safety became terrifyingly real. After FCC Chair Brendan Carr's public statements and broad online outrage, things escalated. Contact info for Disney employees was doxed. Staff from Kimmel's show was also doxed. That led to torrents of harassment and credible death threats. Suddenly, it wasn't about a joke. It became a security crisis. The consequences of the Kimmel joke and the subsequent political pile-on were not confined to boardrooms or television studios. They spilled out into the real world in dangerous and frightening ways. The most immediate and widespread impact was the campaign of harassment targeting people associated with the show and the network. As soon as FCC Chair Brendan Carr and other political figures painted a target on ABC, anonymous actors online took it upon themselves to escalate. The personal information of producers, writers, low-level staff at Jimmy Kimmel Live, and Disney was spread across social media platforms and fringe websites. Their phone numbers, home addresses, email addresses were made public. This doxing led to a predictable and terrifying outcome, a flood of vitriolic messages and death threats. Employees found their phones blowing up with calls from strangers screaming at them. Their inboxes were filled with graphic descriptions of violence. Their families were targeted. This created an atmosphere of pure terror. It transformed a political disagreement into a direct threat to the lives and well-being of dozens of people who just go to work every day to produce a comedy show. This tactic is a hallmark of modern outrage campaigns. It seeks to bypass debate and instead intimidate opponents into silence through fear. For the employees at Disney and ABC, this was a stark reminder that their jobs now carried personal risks they had never imagined. This climate of hostility had a chilling effect on advertisers as well. Companies that buy ad time on shows like Jimmy Kimmel Live want to associate their products with popular entertainment, not with death threats and federal investigations. The controversy made the show radioactive, at least temporarily. Advertisers faced pressure from their own customers to pull their support from the network, creating a financial incentive for Disney to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. This is how political pressure is often translated into corporate action, by making a controversy so toxic that it becomes financially unsustainable. The safety of employees and the flight of advertisers created a two-pronged crisis that forced the company's hand. The most tragic and disturbing event to emerge from this fallout was a shooting at an ABC affiliate station in Sacramento. While the investigation is ongoing, prosecutors have stated they are looking at circumstantial evidence that suggests the attack was politically motivated. The timing was deeply suspicious, occurring in the immediate aftermath of Kimmel's suspension. The alleged motive was not anger at Kimmel's joke, but anger that the network had suspended him in the first place, seen as an act of censorship. This violent act, allegedly a response to the controversy, highlights the terrifyingly unpredictable nature of political rage in 2025. So, what can we take away from this whole chaotic episode? Free speech, corporate responsibility, raw political power. It's a perfect encapsulation of our current moment. We have a comedian who told a dark joke that touched a very raw nerve. We have a political movement that is grieving and angry, and a government willing to use its regulatory power to punish its critics. And we have a corporation caught in the middle, trying to protect its employees, its brand, and its business. There are no easy answers here, and there are no simple heroes or villains. The incident forces us to confront a difficult trade-off. We all believe in free speech, but we also believe in safety and basic human decency. Where do we draw the line? Was Kimmel's joke over the line given the context of a recent assassination? Or was the government's threat to revoke broadcast licenses the real transgression? Can we defend a person's right to say something while still criticizing what they said? These are no longer abstract philosophical questions, doxing death threats and actual political violence. These questions have real-world life-or-death consequences. Finding a balance between robust, even offensive speech, and the need for a safe, civil society. This story is also a stark warning about the weaponization of government agencies. When a regulator like the FCC chairman can threaten a media company's existence over a joke he doesn't like, it sets a dangerous precedent. Regardless of your political beliefs, the idea of the government having the power to silence media outlets that are critical of it should be alarming. A free press is often messy and uncomfortable, and it makes mistakes. But allowing it to be intimidated into submission, whether by online mobs or by government officials, is a step down a very dark road. Ultimately, the path forward requires something that is in very short supply right now: a commitment to lowering the temperature and engaging in good faith. It requires us to distinguish between speech we don't like and speech that is genuinely dangerous.